At 12:14 a.m. on September 26, 1983, a single man held the fate of every person alive in his two hands. He had 5 minutes. No backup, no second opinion, no proof. The computer in front of him said nuclear missiles were already in the air. Protocol said, call the Kremlin. The Kremlin would launch everything. The United States would be gone in 20 minutes. He didn't make the call. If he was wrong, you would not exist right now. His name was Stanislav Petrov. You've probably never heard of him. That is exactly the problem. Deep inside a classified Soviet early warning bunker called Serpukhov 15, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was having a routine night. Then, the screens exploded. A massive red alert, one word in capital letters: launch. The Soviet Oko satellite system had just detected an incoming American intercontinental ballistic missile. Before Petrov could process that, the computer screamed again. A second missile, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. 5 nuclear warheads, already in the air, already heading towards Soviet soil. The automated threat assessment rated it at the highest possible reliability level. The protocol was absolute. Confirm the strike, report to the Kremlin, and the Soviet nuclear arsenal, thousands of warheads, would be in the air within minutes. Millions of people in Washington, New York, and London would be dead before sunrise. The phone was right next to Petrov's hand. All he had to do was pick it up. To understand what Petrov was facing that night, you need to understand 1983. The Cold War was not a distant theoretical threat. It was alive, gaily, and getting worse. 3 weeks before that night in the bunker, Soviet fighter jets had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, a commercial passenger plane that had accidentally drifted into Soviet airspace. 269 civilians died, including a sitting United States congressman. President Reagan responded by calling the Soviet Union an evil empire on live television. Both sides were operating on hair-trigger alert, the constant expectation that the other side might launch a surprise nuclear first strike without any warning whatsoever. In that environment, the military doctrine was simple: trust the machines. To question the computer was not skepticism. In the Soviet military system, questioning the computer was treason. And Petrov was staring at a computer, telling him the missiles were already in the air. Inside the bunker, the atmosphere had collapsed. Dozens of military technicians were on their feet, every single one of them looking at Petrov, waiting. The Kremlin phone was inches from his hand. He knew what was on the other end of that line. Aging, deeply paranoid Soviet leaders who had spent their entire careers preparing for exactly this moment. If he called, they would not deliberate. They would not wait for confirmation. They would launch. Petrov knew what a full nuclear exchange looked like. Washington, New York, London, gone. Moscow, Leningrad, Kyiv, gone. Nuclear winter. Crop failure across the northern hemisphere. The end of civilization. Not metaphorically, literally. He was not supposed to be working that night. He had taken someone else's shift. And now, every living human being on Earth was depending on a man who wasn't even supposed to be in that chair. Petrov did something no protocol prepared him for. He stopped. He forced himself past the sirens, past the flashing screens, past the fear in the room. And he thought. The Soviet satellite system was brand new, complex, unproven, far from perfect. But more than that, something about the scenario made no sense. If the United States was genuinely launching a surprise nuclear first strike against the world's other nuclear superpower, why 5 missiles? A real first strike would involve hundreds, thousands, launched simultaneously from submarines, land silos, and aircraft, designed to paralyze the Soviet military completely before a single retaliation could be ordered. 5 missiles did not end a nuclear superpower. 5 missiles did not start World War III. 5 missiles looked like a glitch. Petrov made his decision. He picked up the phone and told headquarters it was a false alarm. The moment he hung up, the real agony began. Petrov had no proof, no data, no confirmation, no backup analysis, only a gut feeling and a logical deduction that 5 missiles made no strategic sense. If he was wrong, American warheads were minutes away from detonating on Soviet soil. He would be remembered not as the man who saved the world, but as the greatest traitor in Soviet history, the man who left his country defenseless. He sat. The bunker went silent. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. Every second he waited for a flash on the horizon, for the surface radars to confirm impact, for the end. 20 minutes. The screens stayed clear. No detonations, no impact reports, no missiles, nothing. The computer had been catastrophically wrong. Petrov had been right. The world was still alive, and nobody outside that bunker would know what had almost happened for more than a decade.
Here is what the Soviet government did with the man who just saved civilization. They interrogated him for weeks, not because they thought he'd made the wrong call, but because the entire incident exposed a catastrophic flaw in their multi-billion ruble early warning satellite system, a system that had been sold to the Kremlin as infallible. Admitting the system had failed would mean admitting weakness to the West, so they chose silence. Petrov was not given a medal. He was reprimanded, not for his decision, but for failing to properly fill out the bunker logbooks during the height of the crisis. He was quietly removed from his position, reassigned to a desk job, and eventually suffered a severe nervous breakdown from the psychological weight of what he had carried alone. He retired early. He moved into a tiny, deteriorating apartment on the outskirts of Moscow. He lived on a minimal government pension, and the world he had saved had no idea he existed.
The full story only emerged in the late 1990s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when scientists and historians finally got access to the classified incident reports. They discovered what had actually triggered the alert. The Soviet Oko satellite had aligned at a precise angle relative to the sun and a specific formation of high-altitude clouds over the United States. The intense reflection of sunlight off those clouds was misread by the satellite sensors as the thermal signature of intercontinental ballistic missiles launching from silos. The system had not been hacked. It had not been tampered with. It had simply encountered a rare atmospheric configuration that its designers had not anticipated. A statistical anomaly. Sunlight bouncing off clouds almost ended human civilization, and the only thing standing between that anomaly and nuclear war was one man's willingness to trust his judgment over a screaming machine. When the story finally leaked to the public, the world did take notice, briefly. Petrov was invited to the United Nations. He received the Dresden Peace Prize in 2013. He was the subject of a documentary film. But for most of his life, the years that followed that night in the bunker, he lived in obscurity. He gave interviews in his small apartment, surrounded by modest furniture and old books, quietly uncomfortable with being called a hero. "I was just doing my job," he said once. "I was in the right place at the right time." Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017. He was 77 years old. His death was not reported for several months. No state funeral, no national holiday, no monument. The man who gave every person alive today the chance to live their life died quietly in a small apartment, largely forgotten. The Petrov incident is not just a Cold War story. It is a story about something we are still arguing about today. How much do we trust automated systems? How much do we trust algorithms? How much authority do we hand to machines over decisions that cannot be undone? In 1983, the answer the Soviet military had given was trust the machine completely. The machine is more reliable than human judgment. The machine does not panic. The machine does not hesitate. The machine was wrong. The human was right. We survived September 26, 1983, not because our early warning technology was reliable, but because one man had the courage to trust his own reasoning over a system telling him to end the world. That is worth remembering, especially now, as the decisions we delegate to automated systems grow larger and faster and more consequential with every passing year. The question Petrov faced that night has not gone away. It has only gotten harder. If this story hit you the way it should, leave a comment below. Here is what I want to know. Petrov had no proof, no backup, no time. Just logic and a gut feeling against a machine rated at maximum reliability. Would you have made the same call? Or would you have followed the protocol, trusted the system, and made the phone call to the Kremlin? Think about it honestly before you answer, because billions of lives were on the line, and there was no way to know which choice was right until 20 minutes had already passed. Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories about the moments in history that almost didn't happen and the ordinary people who made sure they did. Because the world you are living in right now came closer to not existing than most history books will ever tell you. Stanislav Petrov knew that. He just never got the credit for it. See you in the next one.